Welcome to Soroka Speaks, the podcast for human-centered leaders and those looking to deepen their personal development. We're so happy to have you here, and we hope that you enjoy this episode. What's up, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of Soroka Speaks. I am your host, Emily Haruko, and I'm joined today by my beautiful co-host.
It's Claire.
And we are so excited to welcome back for the second time on the show, Mr. Adam Quiney.
I like the title.
Mr.?
Yes. Yeah. It feels very, I feel 12 once again.
I love it. Monsieur. Today, we have a very special episode for you today as we continue on with educating our audience on the Soroka Index. We bring to you the pillar of resilience. So Adam is here to help us dive into resilience, all the things that it is not, what the shadow side of it is, how it relates to our well-being, our personal lives, and of course, corporate and business optimization, health, and resilience in and of itself. So welcome, Adam. Welcome back. It's really nice to have you here again.
Hello. Great to be back.
Why don't we dive in and let's, you and I had an interesting conversation leading up to this podcast, a little bit around what resilience is and what it isn't when I share the topic with you. And I'm wondering if you can enlighten our audience on a little bit of maybe what the alternative thinking around resilience is, as opposed to just like resilience means we feel good.
Yeah. Well, does the audience have a clear definition of what it is before we provide the counterpoint?
Well, we can define it as it occurs to all of us. So why don't we start there then? What does resilience mean to you?
I would define resilience kind of like, I think the common word I've heard a lot lately is like grit, sort of the ability to stand in the face of, the ability to be maybe confronted, maybe worked over by the moment or the circumstances or whatever's going on, and to kind of maintain a sense of where we stand in all of that, like the sense of self, to be able to stand in the face of the wind or the storm. And sometimes I've heard the word used in the sense of to be able to return to our previous state, so we can get like kind of blown out or muddled around or whatever it happens to be, and then to come back to where we were when we started. So that's sort of like the common definition I'm hearing. Well,
okay, what is your definition?
I think that'll probably come forward as we talk more. Like, I don't have a working definition so much as, that's where I'd start from. And I think it'll start to broaden as we explore some of these other parts. But that's good enough for us to go, to build on for now.
Okay, Claire, what does resilience mean to you?
Resilience to me is my ability or anybody's ability to bounce back. So no matter what is happening to you or around you, it's how do we work through that and keep coming back? And I'm not talking about, abuse or anything. How do we bounce back from abuse? But it's how do we keep coming back fighting? How do we continue to show up? How do we use what happens to us to help build our character, build our strength, build our courage, and come back again? So that's what resilience is for me.
Beautiful. I might add that I think there is an act of resilience that is keeping stress and burnout at bay to a degree, particularly in the professional sense. There was a flavor of what you both said that I might articulate as the ability to continue to return home to yourself, and home being an optimal state of well-being, clarity, purpose, health, and in the face of adversity or challenge or all of the ways that this messed up world challenges us and puts, fires in our path, the ability to move through those in a sound, humane, and nurturing way is what I might add there. So we know with everything, there's a bit of a shadow side. There is, as the pendulum swings, we might say, there is an optimal side of resilience, and there may be a way that one or some relate to resilience through, again, we might say the shadow side of it. So Adam, you want to take us into a little bit of, what resilience isn't in terms of what we've just discussed, but how it might be, construed as such, or essentially
construed. I love it. Yes.
The shadow side of it.
First of all, I think it's super valuable for us to look down this pathway, because a lot of times these concepts or values, or however people relate to them, are sort of held out like the purest, highest form. Like, if you are being resilient, amazing. Or if you have integrity, incredible. And what that perspective does is it pedestals this quality And then once we pedestal the quality, we can't really look at it. We miss out on a bunch of stuff. We see everything that we don't want to see, or sorry, we miss everything that we don't want to see up on there with the pedestal. And so looking at it through this lens, I think is really valuable because there is no such thing as, pure objective, like if you're this way, it's always great. There's shadows, like you said, to everything. So the first part of the shadow is the one that I think people are most familiar with when we talk about like resilience, which would be the lack of it or the underexpression of resilience in someone. And so that would be where we might see that show up in someone where the way they'd been raised was that standing firm in the midst of something was actually really unsafe. And unsafe can be anywhere along the spectrum, right? It can be like unsafe physically, there was actual danger present, or it might just be unsafe. Like if you stood up, that just meant you got bullied more the next time. So better to collapse. That's safer. And so that's the form of kind of, we would call it maybe like a lack of resilience, or typically in corporate settings, people would say, oh, they just don't have enough resilience. Like it's they got so many points put into the resilience box and they didn't get enough, and that's too bad. And so the way this looks is often being blown out by feedback, like having no ability to receive feedback, falling to pieces. This is the kind of, let me see if I can get my hands around this, and then y'all can check my feed and sort of put in any color that feels important. But this is the type of this expression in the world is the kind of thing that a lot of the backlash about a more sensitive way to lead is about. It's sort of like, why should I have to diminish the feedback I'm providing to this person? It's their lack of resilience that's the issue. And so they should actually be increasing their resilience. And, so we get into all of those sort of conversations around it. So that's what this under expressive side of resilience looks like. I'm just going to stop there and see where that leads us for now.
Yeah. So what I kind of heard in that, in my own interpretation, is like resilience is not the white knuckling through something. Resilience is not how much can you just grin, bear down, grin and bear it. Resilience in its most optimal state is like how we navigate those things from like a humane, healthy, optimized way that is aligned and on purpose and human centered. What I'm hearing is like what if resilience is not is, that kind of grinning and bearing it, or the white knuckling is kind of what comes to mind. What did you hear, Claire?
Yeah, interesting. Because I actually, in my head, I have a question about what you said. And when you were relating it to that corporate environment, right? And where sort of leadership tick boxes or keep score about how resilient people are. And I wonder, people can build their resilience in that environment, because especially when you touched on childhood, they take that step back because actually it's physically and psychologically safer for them to do that in those instances, and it becomes learned behavior. And then we bring that naturally, we bring learned behavior from our childhood into who we are as adults. And obviously that no longer, or can no longer in certain situations, serve us well in the corporate world. And so there's two elements for me. It's one, that leaders need to recognize that and see where they can support their staff. But I wonder, as individuals, how much resilience we can learn as adults. Do you have any experience around that? It's just a thought that came up.
Yeah, I love it. I love that you took the thought in your head and you put it out your mouth. Now we get to talk. It's so great. It's
I
really,
try.
really juicy. Before we go down that path, because I'm really excited about what you just shared, Claire, but to what you spoke to, Emily, I'm actually distinguishing something opposite what you pointed to. The second side of what resilience isn't is more along the lines of what you're talking about, white knuckling, like that sort of thing. The first side I'm talking about is the complete lack of any ability to stand up. So these would be, the way we would see this in the corporate setting is that person that is all too eager to receive any kind of feedback whatsoever. You're like, I got feedback. And they're like, oh my God, thank goodness. And they're nodding their head. They're like an eager puppy with feedback, because there's zero ability to stand on their own 2 feet and sort of let the feedback sit in the tension between, here's how I currently see myself, and this feedback suggesting something different. And how do I navigate the tension that's caused? And it's in that tension that transformation and leadership and growth can happen. These people don't have that because there's no self that they can stand on. They're just blown over by it. So yes, exactly. Like collapse, surrender, like complete, just I give up, straight out of the gate. So that's
There's
what,
probably some type of like unworthiness or, lack of confidence, lack of courage. And that's kind of, a little bit of how I'm seeing what you're saying.
like how it was created.
Yeah. And or
Yes.
like what the side of resilience that you're talking about the way that one who is not equipped would experience or is experiencing that domain.
Yes. Yeah.
Got it.
So one thing I want to speak to on this, and then y'all just interrupt me if you're like, no, you're speaking too much, is that down this path, this type of expression of this underexpression of resilience in someone at first is super compelling and often gets really approved of in teams because the way it shows up on the surface is an absolute willingness to take in feedback, which to a leader who's not particularly, or who just has some capacity to grow in their own leadership is going to be like, awesome, this person takes all the feedback. Finally, someone on my team that listens. The trouble is that the feedback has nothing to really land or integrate with. It just kind of lands whole new. So it's like you're overwriting that person every time you give them new feedback. And there can't be any growth if we're overwriting something from whole cloth every time there's a new piece of feedback. So that's a tricky nuance to this part of resilience. This is like you described, it's the way this sounds kind of in our head is like, I'm never going to give up. So this is like grit on grit on grit. And this is usually created when quitting was sort of taught to us as weak or not an option, or, maybe we grew up in hard circumstances and we were just unwilling to let those defeat us. And we would do whatever it took, no matter what, all the time, constantly, forever. And there's an admirability to this, like all of these strategies. The problem is when they're always on, when they're automatic and we can't choose, then it's great until we find the situation where it isn't great. And then we're stuck because we can't choose anything different. And so the way this shows up is resilience on steroids, no ability to surrender. No matter what the situation, we survive through it and we return back to our original state. And that's amazing when we're trying to retain our original state or maintain status quo. This sort of shadow side is really, really good at that. But what is being asked of us is that we grow beyond our existing capacity, that's where this blocks us, like in an organization, in an individual, because we can't surrender anymore. We've lost that ability. And so we can't let go of what used to work in order to create what now will work next. We get locked into that, but I'm not going to give up. And so we just keep hitting our head against that wall, unable to kind of soften and see, hey, what might actually be trying to come through here.
So what I love about that is that's why the Soroka Index is 6 pillars, because what you just described is how alignment comes into play with all of these pillars. So
Mm.
feedback. Resilience. So in a situation like you just described, I would be questioning whether or not the individual is actually truly aligned with what their role is. Are their values aligned with their organization? Are they thriving predominantly, for the most part in their day to day with what their responsibilities are? And if the answer is no, then yes, we could potentially over index and like, I'm never going to quit. And like, I'm just going to make it work. I'm just make it
Yes.
work. And so that's where, I find that this is, a well-rounded, optimized individual or organization is incorporating all of those things. And I think you really spoke to that alignment piece brilliantly there.
And one of the things to that part about the Soroka index is that an over indexing, the resilience on steroids side of this, the over polarized version of this actually can make it hard for an individual, to your point, to kind of soften and see like, oh, the issue here is I'm out of alignment, but because they're so like reliable to just charge headfirst through whatever shows up, they can't see that. And so, really love the way you worded that.
Well, and I think eventually that is not sustainable, right? It might be sustained for a significant period of time. You could do that for 10, 15 years, but eventually, those walls are going to come crashing down, and that alignment or lack of alignment is really going to come rearing its head, in my experience.
Yeah, it's kind of like diminishing returns, I find, is that they can create results up to a certain point, but then what we see in the world is there's a new technology, there's a shift in the market, the economy changes, or there's just changes in our lives, and we can't create anything new, and we're left trying to create more of the old results from the old ways, and eventually, we just kind of become irrelevant.
I was thinking when you were sharing a little bit about if you didn't listen to our previous episode with Adam. Adam is a former coach of mine. You took me on this journey once through what is my survival mechanisms versus what is my essence. And I know that that's an accomplishment coaching tool that you provide for your clients. And I'm wondering a little bit about, like, let's talk about if part of my essence is resilience. If part of my essence is the ability to brilliantly continue to come home to myself, to strive for what is in alignment for me, for what is on purpose. Tell me a little bit of the ways where you think the survival mechanism shows up in the face of that we haven't already touched on?
Well, so yeah, the way a shadow looks, we start with this light, like resilience or alignment, or we could name any number of things, and then there's our fear tends to polarize us. So it either polarizes us to the underexpression of something or the overexpression, the atrophy of that particular muscle or the steroidal hypertrophy of that particular muscle. And neither of those is particularly helpful. And so with resilience, well, there's a piece I want to touch on, which Claire mentioned, which I really loved here, which is this idea. I think a lot of people relate to resilience as a set quality in an individual. And so they hire someone, they're like, oh yeah, this person's really great. They're really resilient as a leader, which is awesome when you're high on resilience, when you're very expressed in that. But some leaders are amazing at a bunch of things, and resilience is the place that they're not yet developed. And if we start to relate to people as, oh, this person just has not yet been developed to be able to hold resilience and to stand it, like that's just what there is to develop in their leadership, that becomes a different conversation than the one that sounds like, crap, we hired the wrong person. They're not resilient enough. Because sooner or later, you're going to come up against everyone's edge of current development and capacity. And then that's the conversation we get into when we're not looking through a developmental lens. So do you want me to elaborate more now on that? Or
Want to know, how do we develop? I'm going to ask both of you, how do we develop resilience? How do we develop it? Like, how is that something that, how would you do that? If somebody came to you and was like, I lay down at every piece of feedback. I quit whenever things get hard. I, have zero belief in myself when challenges arise. Help me with this. Where would you start?
yeah, Claire.
Well, that's those examples to me are almost different things that they need to work on in order to build their resilience. It is their confidence, right? And their ability to speak up and say when they're struggling or when they need something. And it's having the courage to admit when something may be not going their way, or they don't understand it, or they're unable to take whatever they're doing to the next level. Or perhaps they have an issue with delegating, which was one of the things that you were just talking about, Adam, in terms of like, how do you move forward if you're just constantly saying yes? How are you enabled to do new things or look at new technologies or do a new strategy for the business, right? We need to pivot the business because the market's changed or we've just lost our biggest client. And then there was one that you mentioned that made me think about being psychologically safe within your environment. And if you don't have that from a leader, no matter where in the seniority level you are, even the CEOs can report to the board, right? So where you are in that hierarchy, I feel like if you are not psychologically safe, you're unable to communicate effectively. And therefore, those are the things I think that you need in order to build that resilience. Because without the confidence, without that being psychologically safe, having that environment that you can speak up and say what is needed, to have that safe space to analyze, right? What am I doing that I'm great at? And what am I just a hamster on a wheel churning things out, just mediocre. They're churning out, but I don't enjoy it. I don't want to do it. It's not my passion of mine. I feel like once you can get a handle of that or communicate that, that's where that resilience starts to grow, in my opinion.
So I'm hearing resilience is actually a byproduct of a number of different things.
Yeah, I think so.
Adam, what would you say around someone that wants to develop their resilience? How would you develop resilience?
Well, I already loved Claire's answer. And I really agree. Like, all of this has to happen in an environment that nurtures growth, first of all. Like if we don't have that, it's just growing vegetables in a valley that's protected from wind and that's going to bring water in and let the water actually sit. It's going to be much easier than doing the exact same technique in a wide open plain that's blasted with wind and that the water doesn't tend to penetrate as much. So setting the conditions is very important. And two, I think maybe three, we'll see, but at least two things I can see are, first of all, that most leaders, they relate to people through that way I initially talked about, which is the level of resilience you bring to the table is kind of set, plus or minus 5, whatever units of resilience we want to have. Like this person's resilience is X plus or minus 5, and I can develop them plus or minus 5, but that's it. And the starting point is to really get that resilience, I would argue, is a human capacity we all have. We're just trained in it a particular way from our upbringing. And then we take that training into the world. The world rewards what we are bringing forward, and that reinforces it. So the leaders who that were seeking to develop a greater amount of resilience, first of all, they don't see it in themselves. And the fact is, most leaders don't either. So then you have someone that's trying to train someone, but they're kind of like, I'll see if I can get 5 more resilience points out of this lunkhead. But, whatever, we'll do my best. And that's not a very empowering experience for anyone involved. Whereas if we as a leader can actually see this person has plenty of resilience, they've just been trained by life and the world and probably subsequent jobs and everything to actually diminish that in themselves. They've been trained to do that a particular way. If you develop that kind of seeing in someone, they're going to relate to the person radically different. And that's going to enable radically different results. So that's point number one. And then I've got a second part if you'd like me to go into that.
For
Yeah, cool. Part two is that the nice thing about our shadows is that they feel crappy because we're holding ourselves in a posture energetically that is unnatural. Sort of like if I try to walk around on all fours, that's going to feel crappy because it's not how my body is designed to walk around. I'm designed to be bipedal. And so anytime someone is doing, that version of like, let's say being under resilient, they're blown over by feedback. You can't tell them anything. Everyone walks on eggshells around them because you just don't want to have to manage, you don't want to have to deal with that. There's an experience about that this person doesn't like. And that shows up for the person in question and it shows up for us. And that's our way in. Is we can start to meet that person and be like, hey, there's something that I'm noticing in your leadership that I'd love to develop with you. I'd love to partner with you to develop that. And it's that I notice when you get feedback, you sort of like immediately collapse and just the feedback becomes the new version of you. And it seems like something's getting missed there. How is that for you? And we can start to explore that sensation that's happening to them when they do that. And that's going to give them and the leader developing them an access point, like a felt experience that we can begin to build, grow, and from there start to develop them in all the ways that Claire mentioned. Well,
And
I
it
got a simultaneous,
yeah.
that was a good sign.
No, the brain was ticking. No, for me, the brain was ticking, and I was thinking about, as a leader, as a coach, and I've, run teams before, and it is being a leader is an incredibly hard job, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because you're leading yourself, you're doing the business objectives, and you're leading a team of one or more. Sometimes people have huge teams that they're responsible for. And it is understanding those nuances of every individual person and what works for someone doesn't work for somebody else. And it is having that time and patience and understanding of how everything is landing, right? Or that feedback is landing. And sometimes it is, I feel like, it's asking the right questions sometimes of individuals to get the right answers. And I think sometimes people are not a lot of times when when it's a negative situation or they don't understand something, they're not forthcoming with that, right? They don't want to admit that there's a weakness that they have in the business but when you dig into why that is and you understand, like, it could just even be over a coffee. Oh, have you got any siblings? How are your parents? And you just get to know a little bit more about I feel like their upbringing or their previous jobs or their home life. And when you get to see a bigger picture of who they are, I think that's how you understand more about where they're coming from, that it naturally comes out. You're creating that sort of more personal impact. And I know it's hard in the workplace, but I do think that you have to dig a little bit deeper as a leader when you've got somebody that's either taking everything and it's flooring them, like you're saying, or they're completely like, I'm just not interested in any of this feedback. There's nothing wrong with me. It's a you problem. I feel like sometimes we have to dig in just a little bit as a leader to really understand, how can I make this land better? How can I explain it in a different way? How can I deliver it in a different way? And those are the things that I look for as well, because it really resonates what you're saying. But those are the things that I try when I'm leading others and when I see people struggling in sort of my coaching sessions as well. Try and dig a little bit deeper into that.
I'm hearing that like optimal leadership, or what I might say transformational leadership, is resilience, because it is therefore creating that environment where you can meet the person where they're at, with some empathy, with a possibility for how they may grow or improve in the future. And I guess, looking at it through an ontological lens, and Adam, I'll, toss this one over to you, because what you mentioned, what you alluded to earlier, and what I'll just articulate is like the way that we relate to people often shapes, if not completely shapes, our experience of them. There's the distinction that I love around like already listening. I don't
Mm.
know that I brought this one in. But already listening is like Jack sits at the cubicle next to me and Jack's just kind of a jerk and Jack's always talking really loud on the phone and he's always dominating the space and he spilled my, coffee on my keyboard last week and I just start to relate to Jack like a jerk. And when I relate to Jack like a jerk, doesn't matter how Jack shows up, I'm now already affiliating him with being a jerk, that it can be some random Thursday. I could have not, had any interactions with him for 4 days, but I'm already showing up with the mindset and the attitude that he's a jerk. Guess how Jack's going to show up for me, right? So I think the same thing happens, when we are in our optimized leadership, when we are cultivating transformation with the people around us and on our teams, we are responsible for how we relate to others shapes our experience of them. Anything you want to add there, Adam?
Yeah, I love that. Friggin' Jack, too. I mean, come
I
on, get your
know,
act together,
right?
buddy.
Sorry if your
Spilling
name's Jack.
soup.
Please forgive
Anyhow,
me.
yeah, it's always Reggie is the bonehead for me. But anyhow, yeah, the one thing that I think is really valuable for leaders to understand is that all of us, no one is like resilient, right in the middle. I nailed it. We'd love to believe that. I would love to believe that about me. But the truth is, we all have shadows. These shadows are there, whether we like them or not. The more we can make peace with the fact that they're there, the easier it is for us to see them, blah, blah, blah. But one thing to consider is that we tend to index either on one side or the other for any particular quality we could choose. So since we're working with resilience, maybe we have a team of people and the leader is like hardcore hypertrophy, overexpressed resilience. Nothing. We won't stop at nothing. We will never quit. We will work 24-hour days. Blah, 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 blah. Those people are going to have an especially strong judgment towards people that are on the other pole of resilience. And the other interesting thing about this is there's 6 particular qualities in the pillars, right?
Yeah, you got
So it'd be great for this leader if most of the people coming through the door had like kind of their dysregulation happened in other pillars. But more likely they're going to end up, because of the way the world kind of tends to work, they're going to draw people to them and onto their teams that have a breakdown, a dysregulation and resilience. And often those people are going to be on the other side. And those are the people for which the leader will have zero patience, zero tolerance. Oh my God, look how weak they are. Sometimes people just need a swift kick up the ass, as my dad would often tell me. No, Dad, I did not need that. Thank you. Maybe he'll listen to this. I'll send it to him afterwards. So what happens is that those people, those leaders, are especially challenged by people that are underexpressing on the other side. And the thing that's really interesting to me is it's the same breakthrough. They're both learning how to regulate and sit in a new form of resilience in this instance. They're just coming at it from the other side. And so the great irony of this for leaders listening is the people you tend to have the most judgment of are the people that are on the other side of your kind of equation. And they're the people that are going to represent the biggest breakthrough for your leadership and for your teams, because you're over correcting in the other direction unwittingly.
I say that to leaders that I work with when they're working with a challenging direct report. It's like, that this is exactly the experience that is cultivating who you are as a leader. Like, you don't get better at leadership by managing and leading, the people that are easier or on board or optimized and on purpose, right? The grist for the mill is, those that we experience the challenges with, and therefore providing the opportunity to really refine and cultivate who we are as leaders.
Mm-hmm.
That's life, isn't it? I think as well. It's leadership. 100% agree with you. But I think that life throws at us things that are meant to challenge us and meant to push us to be the next version of who we are, right? Let's see if you can handle this. Let's see how this builds your character, how this builds your resilience. I'm just going to throw these things at you. And in leadership, I'm going to throw these people in your team and see how it shapes your leadership and how you show up. And I think what's really important is, as a leader, we have the ability to shape somebody else's growth. We have the ability to change the trajectory of their careers as well. And it can be so empowering for leaders to come through that lens. My job here is to do my job, but empower you and help you be the best employee and have the best experience that you can within my team, within this company, within your career, as long as I'm in your environment. And I think sometimes we forget as leaders, we have so much going on that we actually forget the impact that we have on the people around us.
I've said it before and I'll say it again. It's like the opportunity we have as leaders is to cultivate environments where people get to express who they are as brilliant and genius in the world. That is truly the opportunity that we have. And it's on us to cultivate our leadership skills, to be a situational leader, to do our own, deep inner work, confront our own shadows, receive support in whatever capacities we need to, that allow us to then cultivate and shape the environments where those on our team can truly access and practice who they are as brilliant and genius.
Well said.
Beautiful.
I just think it's super cool that one, y'all are having this conversation. Like, I wish more of this conversation was happening. And it always strikes me. I can't remember who said this. It's kind of like internet business lore at this point, but like Enron, the company, had the word integrity written on its walls right up until the moment it was arrested, shut down, all of that stuff. But I really believe, I think what most of us do with that is we're like, see, it's bullshit. There's nothing there. It's garbage. Throw it out. I think that value was probably legitimate when it was started, but because we're unwilling to consider that we have a shadow at play, we then can't do anything about it because we can't see it. And so I laud this conversation. I applaud it because it's so important. And to the extent leaders take this on and really consider, like, there might be a part here beyond just the glorification of this quality that is really worth looking at and really worth holding with a degree of reverence. I think that's incredible. And that's what I think allows us to avoid the Enron kind of situation.
Yeah. For me, it's all about, when we do work with organizations and individuals, is really about establishing what those values are, but making sure that we have leadership principles, connected to them. So we understand what that value in action actually looks like. And with that, we can create a higher level of accountability to make sure we're actually living our values.
Nice.
All right. Well, on that note, thank you all for joining us on this episode of Soroka Speaks. So grateful to you, Mr. Adam Quiney, and the lovely Claire Adamau. We appreciate all of our listeners, and thank you both for being here today. And we're wishing you all well on your journey of resilience and optimizing your own leadership in the world. Thanks for being here. We'll see you next time. You've been listening to Soroka Speaks. Thank you so much for being here. You can catch us twice a month on the podcast to keep learning about how you can deepen your human-centered leadership and personal development. We'll see you next time.